Ms Limbrick.
Thank you, President. I'm glad to have an opportunity to make a contribution to debate on the Education and Training Reform Bill 2024. The Education Minister was quoted in an article about homeschooling earlier this week, stating, I quote, "The best place for students to learn is in the school, the most important protective factor for a young person to be in the school in front of a qualified teacher," end quote. This quote is a good one for explaining the difference between the government's position and the Libertarian position. My view is that the best place for students to learn is a place where they are safe, their education is supported, and they have their best opportunity to thrive. For some kids, and an increasing number recently, school is not the best place for them. Parents and families agree. A recent article in the ABC noted that Queensland had seen a doubling of homeschooling registrations in the past 4 years. I don't know the figures for Victoria, but conversations I've had with people who are involved in the sector have told me that there is definitely an increased interest. Some people make this choice because they believe they can deliver a better and more well-rounded education experience for their kids. Or maybe the local schools don't match their values or priorities. Others have taken their kids out of school because of bullying issues. But there's also another reason, which has been more of a COVID phenomena. There's been a lot of reporting about the school refuser challenges. After the lockdowns and home learning enforced by the government's response to COVID, some students have developed severe anxiety and other mental health issues, something that I warned about at the time. Fortunately, there is also a growing number of organisations dedicated to supporting homeschooling families, with networks of homeschoolers organising meetups, sporting activities or excursions to museums and other venues. There are also organisations dedicated to helping families navigate the shift to homeschooling or assisting their learning needs with professional tutoring services. And this really gets to the heart of the difference in perspective. I don't think the government really likes this trend at all. They would prefer everyone go through the standard education system, as central planning is part of their DNA. Libertarians are the opposite of this. We support maximum freedom, diversity, innovation and competition. It has been a long-standing policy of our party that funding should follow the student and allow maximum freedom for families in how they choose to allocate that funding. In this country, this idea hasn't gained much traction yet. But I think that we are going to see increasing interest in education reform to support greater diversity. The idea itself has a long history, with Thomas Paine suggesting that the government should support, but not direct, the education of poor families in his book The Rights of Man in 1791. John Stuart Mill made a similar argument in 1859, stating that all attempts by the state to bias the conclusions of its citizens on disputed subjects are evil, end quote. This is undoubtedly a common reason for parents choosing non-government schools or homeschooling. Mill did, however, support ensuring that all children had an education, and where required, government support should be allocated to the family for them to choose where best to source that education. And in more recent years, it was Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman who popularised the idea of school choice with a school voucher system in a 1955 book, and reiterated in his famous book Capitalism and Freedom in 1965. It's not just a theory though. This model has been trialled in several places and is increasingly popular in the United States of America. Sweden used to have a highly centralised education system, probably far worse than here. But in 1992, they shifted to a voucher system. This was done partially to allow more freedom and choice, and partially to encourage competition and innovation in the education sector. There have been many reviews, but it's likely that these reforms led to better outcomes overall, and not just in independent schools, slowed the increasing costs of delivering education, reduced violence in schools, and allowed for different specialisations. Millions of students in the USA now participate in some kind of school choice program, from school vouchers to tax credit schemes and others. This policy approach is receiving a lot more interest, with multiple jurisdictions considering implementing or expanding programs. Homeschooling is now the fastest growing education choice in the United States, with about 2.5 million students in 2019, growing to almost 4 million in 2024. Corey DeAngelis and the Education Freedom Institute, amongst others, are helping to support this change. Back here in Australia, it's all a bit of a mess. Overlapping state and federal responsibilities and funding makes truly radical and ambitious reform difficult. There are frequently debates about funding for private versus public schools, and the poor homeschoolers are lucky to get a few crumbs. It would be simpler, more effective, and likely lead to better outcomes to simply fund each student and allow maximum freedom. Our policy settings are still embedded in the 19th century thinking, and no amount of centres of excellence are going to boost standards and innovation in the ways that we need to meet the challenges of the 21st century. As for the bill itself, well, it does several things that I support, such as streamlining some processes and allowing principals to delegate some authorisations. It also tidies up a process around schools that cease operating and a few other minor amendments which I support. Mostly the bill is either benign or has provisions that Libertarians could support. There are some issues, however. The first of which is that the whole policy area is devoid of any substantive ideas for reform, efficiency, freedom or innovation. That is a broad critique of high-level policy and funding though. In terms of this bill, I've received a lot of correspondence from people involved in the homeschooling sector. They've expressed a range of concerns, some of which I'll seek clarity regarding during the committee stage of the debate. Before I go into these though, I do want to thank the Minister's Office for providing a briefing to discuss these matters. Some of the concerns were related to the Victorian Registration and Qualification Authority and whether they were going to target homeschoolers. I don't believe that this is the case, or at least not directly, but I do have concerns about how the regulator is currently engaging with businesses that provide support to homeschoolers and how this legislation might give even more power to VRQA. One of the main concerns is around requests for documents that are currently occurring. Several organisations providing tutoring and support to homeschoolers have stated that they have received notices to provide documents that they believe would be breaching the Privacy Act to comply with. I don't know if this is the case, but I'd be unsurprised as we saw it during the COVID pandemic. Everybody just seemed to ignore the requirements for businesses to hold certain medical data in ways that likely breach the Privacy Act, but no one seemed to care, for the greater good or something like that. The key concern is that there seems to be no justification for them to do this. It's not clear that there have been any complaints, and I've struggled to understand why there would be a reasonable suspicion that these tutoring services are operating in a way that would require them to be registered as a school. The whole thing seems like an unnecessary targeting of the homeschooling support system when the VRQA likely has more important things to do. I've been hearing whispers for a while now about the quality of education being provided by many registered training organisations, and I believe that recent scandals are the tip of the iceberg. We can probably expect more revelations over the course of the year and probably an inquiry at a minimum by next year. What I would like to see is maximum freedom and options with private schools, specialist schools, homeschooling cooperatives, micro schools, and a streamlined system which reduced the bureaucracy and provided more sensible oversight focused on child safeguarding and ensuring basic quality and service delivery. While there are aspects of the bill that I like, I am reluctant to support giving more powers to the regulator to go on witch hunts without strong justification, so I will not be supporting this bill. I will seek further clarification on aspects during the committee stage of debate. Thank you.